So my next guest is a former executive vice president of the Washington-based Center for Strategic and International Studies. Robin Niblett is now director of Chatham House, home of the Royal Institute of International Affairs right here in London. Joins us in the studio now. Thanks so much for coming in. So I just want to start by asking you what this means. This is an event, I suppose, of seismic significance, not only in U.S. efforts to defeat al-Qaeda, but in U.S. foreign policy.
Well, I think it's a huge achievement for President Obama. This is the 10th anniversary year, obviously, of the 9/11 attacks. To being able to capture and kill, or kill and capture, Osama bin Laden will be a huge feather in his cap. And ultimately, from a psychological standpoint for the United States, one has to remember this attack on the United States, on New York, and on Washington really had a deep psychological impact. We've seen from the reactions in New York itself. To be able to bring some sort of closure, which I think is what we want to do often in the United States to these conflicts, this does give that impression of closure, which is important. It also supports him domestically. I mean, this has been his strategy to focus on Pakistan, to focus on Afghanistan, to say Iraq was the wrong war. He's been carrying out numerous drone attacks, and there's been a number of killings of al-Qaeda leaders ahead of this. So it's a vindication of his strategy.
So would you say that it gives President Barack Obama more of a boost on the domestic level, shores his position up inside the country, than it does have broader implications for actual foreign policy? Is it going to be much of a game changer for the US in Afghanistan, for example?
I think that the conflict in Afghanistan and even international terrorism had moved beyond Osama bin Laden. He'd become a kind of iconic figure. We haven't seen or heard much from him. And in a way, terrorism obviously will continue. And I think it's less important probably from that standpoint than it is, as you said, from the position inside the United States. Obama was already moving to the center after his defeats in the congressional elections last November. And yet people are thinking, could America come to bipartisan agreements on these really difficult issues as a time of sort of Tea Party, right-left battles? This gives him an authority, I think, to try to strike middle ground compromises on domestic issues, not just international issues. So I do think this has a big impact domestically.
I'm interested by what you say there about what it means for al-Qaeda. I spoke to somebody in the last hour that said, look, you know, al-Qaeda is not, it doesn't have a sort of traditional chain of command. It's not a monolithic organization. It is effectively decentralized. Does that mean it's not going to have much of an impact on al-Qaeda as a terrorist organization, their potency in the world?
I think the timing of the death is critical in this sense. One of the most momentous things of this year in the Middle East, nothing to do with al-Qaeda, nothing to do with international terrorism, a search for democracy and freedom across the Middle East and North Africa at a time when al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden were saying democracy was a Western import.
Had al-Qaeda already been rendered futile then?
I think al-Qaeda was already on the back foot and going out. But it doesn't mean that those people who are opposed either to domestic leaders, whether it be in Yemen, whether it be in parts of Indonesia, whether it be in parts of North Africa, won't still remain motivated and use the techniques of asymmetric warfare that al-Qaeda did. But al-Qaeda, as an operative center point for international terrorism, was already on the way out.
Now, if we just peel away the layers, the circumstances surrounding bin Laden's death, a key component of US foreign policy and the war in Afghanistan has been this cooperation with Pakistan. So the fact that bin Laden was living in a compound, high security, near the capital city, Islamabad, is this going to fuel suspicion that some faction in the intelligence services knew about this?
It will inevitably fuel that suspicion. Pakistan is a complicated country to decipher. Every country is complicated. But the sense that there are some elements, perhaps ex-ISI officers, if not current ones, who have looked more positively towards the operations of al-Qaeda and Taliban is now going to be reinforced by this discovery and where he is. People thought he'd be hiding, as I said, in a cave in North Waziristan.
And that wasn't the case. He was near the capital city, in a crowded place where he would have perhaps been recognized.
Well, again, I don't know the circumstances of him traveling in and out, what he looked like when he was captured. We know a number of these leaders don't look like they did on their video. But it could fuel the level of
mistrust there between the US and Pakistan.
I think that it fuels the level of mistrust, and yet on the other hand, the fact that he has been killed fuels a positive closure element as well for the US-Pakistan relationship. It is a contentious relationship. It'll fuel the mistrust at one level, but on the other hand, this has succeeded.
Now, we also had President Barack Obama warning Americans to be vigilant. The US has issued a worldwide travel alert. What could this mean for a risk of an attack in the US and indeed right here in Europe?
One would have to say that you have to look out for a likelihood of some type of reprisal attack taking place. However, as we were discussing a minute ago, the way al-Qaeda has tended to operate in recent years internationally is to provide that kind of backup, logistical, even motivational support for people wanting to conduct attacks domestically because they were motivated to do so, whether it be in the Middle East or whether it be in Europe. To trigger off that sort of attack very rapidly isn't necessarily straightforward. There isn't a monolithic central command that says, now we launch attack A or B that's in our back pocket. But some type of counter-reaction is bound to be attempted.
Robin Niblett, director of Chatham House think tank right here in London. Great to talk to you. Thanks for your analysis.